enabled the streaming to Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch. So we will start here momentarily. It's now 11:55. We have about 5 minutes before the start of the program. So those of you who are logging in early, welcome to today's program. We'll start here soon. Hello, everyone. We're now about 3 minutes from the start of the program. I just wanted to remind everybody, well, first of all, thank you for joining today's program. In terms of asking questions for today's program, we encourage you to use the Q&A function. We also encourage you to share your thoughts or any additional resources or links that you think people should know about through the chat box. But for questions, please use the Q&A box. And we'll do our best to answer everyone's questions in the time allotted at the end of our presentation. We do have an hour total for today's program, but there are a lot of people signed up for this program. So it does help to ask your questions early. So as soon as you think of the question, feel free to type it into the chat box, and our moderator will filter through those at the end of the program. Welcome, everybody, to today's program. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. I'm filling in for my colleague, Lisa Versace, today. For those of you who may be less familiar with the work of the California Preservation Foundation, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization committed to ensuring the rich diversity of California's historic resources and cultural heritage are identified, protected, and celebrated for their history and for their valuable role in California's economy, environment, and quality of life. Our work is made possible by the generous support of our members, donors, and sponsors, including our lead education sponsor, WJE. We invite you to join this preservation community by going to californiapreservation.org/membership. You may also donate to CPF by visiting californiapreservation.org/donate. Our website is also where you can find information on other future programs and events. For today's program, our moderators will be Rita Cofield, trustee and board secretary for the California Preservation Foundation, and Alicia Palachek, architectural historian and planner with Architectural Resources Group. Our speaker today is Ashley Lindsay. She's a planner with the City and County of San Francisco. I wanted to thank all three of our participants today for generously volunteering their time to be here. And a word of special thanks to Rita and Alicia, who are members of our education committee and helped conceive and organize this wonderful program. For our audience, if at any time during the program you have questions for the speakers or anything else you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom window. We have set aside time at the end of the program for questions, and we'll do our best to get to everyone's in the time allotted. And as a reminder, our program will be recorded in full and will be accessible on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and LinkedIn profile. I'm now going to turn it over to Alicia Palachek and Rita Cofield to introduce the program and our speaker today.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. So I wanted to kind of start out today by just giving a very quick overview of why we wanted to put this webinar together on effective community engagement. Rita and I have many conversations about this, and it's something that we're passionate about. Community outreach is something that many of us are familiar with. More recently, though, we're seeing cities move beyond community outreach, which is sort of a one-directional approach to community engagement, which goes both ways in preservation planning. And since it's a relatively new approach that we're seeing cities using, we wanted to provide a case study to see how one city has approached it, how the process has gone, and what they learned in the process. Now I'll turn it over to Rita, who will give an overview of the program today.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. I think we can just jump right into Ashley's presentation. I think I am super excited because, again, it's like Alicia said, a lot of folks are doing this, but not many organizations, and Ashley's with the city. Not many organizations have actually completed the process. So it'll be very interesting to see how her organization and how sort of they tackled this community engagement rather than community outreach approach to it. With that, I'll turn it over to Miss Ashley.
Thank you so much, Rita, Alicia, for that introduction, John, for kind of kicking us off today. With that, I will go ahead and share my screen. So please bear with me. Can you see my screen or my PowerPoint? Okay, great.
Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ashley Lindsay, and today I'm excited to share insights into the African American Citywide Historic Context Statement and its recent adoption process. In my nearly 8 years with the San Francisco Planning Department, I've had the privilege of working on various projects from land use development to cultural resources survey. Last year, I took on the role of engagement coordinator for the citywide cultural resources survey program, which is within our preservation team. Today's presentation will cover the African American Citywide Historic Context Statement, our approach to racial and social equity, key project milestones, community partnerships, and the adoption process. So many of you may be familiar with what a historic context statement is, but for those who don't know, a historic context statement provides an analytical framework for identifying and evaluating resources, explaining how geography, history, and culture shaped a community's development over time. They guide us in recognizing the importance of certain properties and their characteristics. The African American Citywide Historic Context Statement delves into the rich history of San Francisco's African American community from Mexican and Spanish colonial periods to the present day. While it's not exhaustive, it does focus on key events, individuals, and areas critical to understanding the built environment. The African American Historic Context Statement will aid community history advocates and city planners in the identification, documentation, recognition, and protection of buildings and sites associated with the social and cultural heritage of San Francisco's African American community. This is a living document, and we will continue to update it, and it will evolve as we learn more. So next, I'll talk about our racial and social equity approach. Traditionally, historic preservation efforts have primarily focused on tangible cultural resources such as buildings and sites. However, this narrow focus has often resulted in assessments of significance driven by experts and mandated by regulations, which have inadvertently excluded voices from diverse communities, including American Indian, Black, and other people of color from the decision-making process. It's crucial to acknowledge that without the active involvement of communities, the interpretation of what is considered valuable and worthy of protection remains skewed and incomplete. In 2020, the San Francisco Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Department adopted resolutions to center preservation planning efforts on principles of racial and social equity. This commitment entails exploring innovative approaches to incorporate new ways of honoring and sustaining cultural heritage. Additionally, it involves expanding participation, building capacity, and fostering partnerships to ensure that communities have the necessary resources and agency to guide and lead the preservation of their historic resources and cultural heritage. So knowing that we needed to center racial and social equity in our work efforts, one of our goals was to expand engagement with underrepresented communities and cultivate vibrant partnerships. We also sought to be inclusive through collaborative processes and aim to forge deeper connections through living tools, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. Integrating community-led engagement in preservation allows evaluations to be informed by community members with lived experiences. They offer invaluable insights into historical significance and cultural heritage, enriching our understanding and ensuring a more inclusive preservation process. With this shift in our approach, our project's evolution reflects a transition from data-focused to community-led that supports co-creation with communities. Now we'll cover the project's history and recent outreach efforts. In 2013, we embarked on a significant journey with the initiation of the African American Citywide Historic Context Statement, thanks to support from the Historic Preservation Fund Committee. This project is a testament to the collaborative efforts of community members, historians, organizations, preservation professionals, and city staff. Drawing from existing African American scholarship, including the invaluable work of Dr. Albert Broussard, Sue Bailey Thurman, and Delilah Beasley, an assistant advisory group was formed comprising of community historians, activists, and planning professionals. Together, they worked to guide the completion of the draft. In January 2016, we reached a milestone with the publication of the draft report written by Tim Kelly Consulting for Plank Historic Consulting, Alfred Williams Consultancy, and Planning Department staff. Subsequently, in May 2016, the Historic Preservation Commission held a public hearing to gather public feedback. Public input highlighted the need for additional research and a more comprehensive document. Responding to this feedback, our preservation staff collaborated with the San Francisco African American Historical and Cultural Society to conduct further research, community outreach, planning, and revisions. Although major revisions to the context statement were completed in 2019, the process faced delays due to the pandemic. After the pandemic and in 2022, the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, in collaboration with our preservation staff, spearheaded a series of focus groups. These sessions aim to introduce the context statement, delve into potential landmarks identified in the report, and uncover additional significant places across the city. From fall 2023 to winter 2024, we hosted a series of community events to familiarize community with the context statement. So what was our goal? It was to connect with the community, identify any information gaps, and gather input on how they wanted significant places to be recognized and celebrated, which I'll dive deeper into in the next few slides. Next, I'll cover our community partnerships. So first, I want to acknowledge all the contributors who played a role in shaping the historic context statement. This document, which has been over 11 years in the making, again, is a testament to the dedication and collaboration of everyone involved. When it comes to community engagement, it's been a journey of managing city agency relationships, nurturing community partnerships, and creating a space for meaningful input. With this in mind, we were able to develop living tools that can inform decision-making within our regulatory framework. So in September 2023, we partnered with the San Francisco African American Arts and Cultural District and the Dr. George W. Davis Senior Center to host a community forum. This partnership was built on trust and understanding of the community's needs. Our goal was to gather feedback on the African American citywide historic context statement while also supporting the community's existing programming. Thanks to careful planning and preparation, the event was a success, allowing for meaningful conversations with community members. Following the forum, we analyzed and synthesized the information gathered, providing us with a solid foundation to continue engaging with the community based on their feedback. Thanks to careful planning and my apologies. So on January 20th, we had the opportunity to table at the Ingleside Branch Library during their annual open house. It was a fantastic day of engagement where we connected with over 70 individuals, predominantly young families, youth, and some elderly members of the community. We then organized a second community forum in partnership with the Booker T. Washington Community Service Center, which was also held at their facility. The forum was designed to be engaging, and it featured opening remarks, musical entertainment, and engagement stations to foster conversations between staff and participants. During the forum, we presented the revised context statement and shared feedback gathered from the first community forum at the Dr. George W. Davis Senior Center. This provided an opportunity for additional input and ongoing dialogue. So with all of this engagement in mind, to date, our historic context statement has identified over 40 properties associated with African American history that may be eligible for local landmark designation. Here on this slide are a sample of some of those potential landmarks. For both community forums, we created interactive boards showcasing key names, sites, and events from the context statement. We then invited the community to add, recognize, and prioritize items for further research or designation. Each station covered major themes in the context statement, including arts and culture, community leaders, and potential landmarks. Participants engaged with the content, providing valuable feedback. For landmarks, we offered maps identifying designated and eligible landmarks, enabling real-time input on what should be considered eligible. This approach empowered the community to inform us which eligible landmarks should take priority. The feedback we received from our community engagement events was incredibly invaluable. After thorough analysis, we identified key themes and areas of focus, which are now documented in a community input tracking report. During these events, we also asked community members for their suggestions on potential partners to explore these areas further. Their suggestions were diverse, ranging from individual community members to churches, businesses, social service organizations, and city agencies. As I mentioned earlier, we developed a community input dashboard, and on this slide, it's just a snapshot of part of the document. And we also refer to it as the community input dashboard. Essentially, it encapsulates themes that surface through our analysis of community input. These themes highlight gaps in information regarding people, organizations, and community events that are recommended for inclusion in the context statement. Our department developed responses and recommended actions for each gap, which is outlined in the report, and it includes plans for further community consultation, recognition, opportunities, and estimated timelines for completion. To provide clarity on how feedback will be addressed, let's take the example in the first row of undernamed leaders and figures not included in the context statement. As a short-term goal, updates to educators, health workers, and religious leaders have been identified to expand existing themes in the report. This information was provided by community members and raised at each community event. So we anticipate completing updates to this theme over the next year. So let's discuss adoption and next steps. So as you've seen from the key project milestones and the project history, we did go through several rounds of revisions. We built community partnerships and we hosted several engagement activities. And with all of that, I'm thrilled to announce that the Historic Preservation Commission unanimously adopted the African American Citywide Historic Context Statement as a living document just this past February. It's a big milestone for our team. And I want to emphasize that this document wouldn't have reached the point of adoption by HPC without the invaluable partnerships and guidance from the community. As mentioned earlier, we've provided recommendations in the dashboard and identified areas for updates in the context statement. These updates include expanding the history and significance of landmarks such as the Third Baptist Church, Bethel AME Church, and First AME Zion Church. We're also addressing missing biographies of church leaders and their contributions to community housing, civil rights, and social programs. Additionally, we're adding biographies of African American professionals, artists, educators, civil rights activists, and community leaders. In future updates, we'll focus on profiling important civil rights and civic organizations, highlighting the significance of community and recreation centers, and acknowledging the impact of leadership and staff at these neighborhood institutions. We'll also provide additional details on longstanding businesses and community institutions. The revised report will feature a foreword by Carl Williams from the San Francisco African American Historical and Cultural Society, expanded histories of the African American churches, and the contributions of community advocates, leaders, educators, and public figures. Additionally, we'll include an expanded discussion of influential civic organizations, sororities, and fraternities, as well as professional organizations. In our ongoing updates to the draft, we'll also delve deeper into civil rights history and present-day anti-displacement efforts led by African Americans. Moreover, we recognize the need to acknowledge the impact and legacy of redevelopment, as well as celebrate and uplift significant community members and places that were lost. Moving forward, we will continue to strengthen existing partnerships and build new relationships with community members and organizations. So before I conclude, I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Francis McMillan, Malik Looper, Taylor Booker, Rich Sucre, Erica Uribe, the SF Survey team and planning staff, contributors, and community partners. Without their dedication and contributions, we would have not made it this far, and they've been instrumental in this work. So with that, I'd like to conclude, and thank you.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I know we have some questions, a couple questions already in the chat, but congratulations to you and your team for what I think is truly community engagement and not just simply outreach. I am impressed with how your team seems to have genuinely earned the right for community to move forward and complete the work. I suppose that's why it took so long. So, as you were building, you were moving at the speed of trust. So as a reminder, I know that John put it in the chat. As a reminder for your questions, it's preferable if you pop them in the Q&A box. You can also put them in the comments, or if you would like to ask Ashley yourself, just raise your hand and we'll keep an eye on that, and John will take you off mute. So the beauty of being a moderator is that we get to ask our questions first. So I have, I know that there are two, or at least 3 questions in the chat. But my first question, Ashley, is it correct that this is the city's first African-American historic context statement?
Yes, that's correct. This is the city's first African-American citywide historic context statement.
Okay. Are there other historic context statements that you all have done?
Yes, there are other statements. So our team has developed various context statements, and they are categorized into 3 different categories. So that's architectural, cultural, and thematic context. To date, there are 23 that are geographic, 6 that are architectural, 8 thematic, and 3 cultural that have all been adopted. And then there are also 15 others that are in progress. So yeah, we have quite a few.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. And my last question, and then I'll ask the first question that's in the chat. You call it a living document. What's the system in place for that ongoing dialogue, especially since there are regulatory tools involved?
Sure, that's a great question. As you mentioned, we're moving towards developing the processes and tools that support continuous dialogue and partnership with communities. For example, through the community input dashboard, that is the tool that we've developed, and we hope that will kind of be the source that allows us to engage with community, cite what they prioritize, and use that as a way to reference what should be incorporated into our work plans. So again, this ensures that we're continuously receiving input, and then we will share that back out with community and our Historic Preservation Commission to make sure that we're just addressing community priorities.
Okay, one last question. What do you say to people who say, like, how big is this going to get? Like, this is going to be a massive document if you're like continuing to have it be a living document. Are you concerned about that? Is that something that like, is there a cutoff point that your team is like, okay, once we have all of this, once we have 300 pages, we're done? Like, what do you say to folks who are like, there's going to be a lot?
Yeah, that's a really great point. Again, I think, history, it never stops. It's being made right now. So in terms of the document, we haven't developed a strategy of how we'll manage that, if it'll become like volumes or anything like that. But I think based on the feedback that we have right now, there is an opportunity to conduct research with community members and community organizations to either just provide updates to the existing report. And then in terms of the dashboard that we've developed, that should, as we're addressing some of those themes, those should fall off of the dashboard while new ones are being incorporated.
Okay, good. It's a good strategy. Okay, so first question from our participants is, what types of activities were used at the engagement stations?
So with the engagement stations, so for this particular project, we created 6 stations. The first station was more of like the introduction to what is a historic context statement. And then the remaining stations covered either chapters or specific themes from the report. And then the last station, we made that more of an engagement focus where we wanted to receive feedback from community on how they would like to see either resources or particular individuals recognized. So we were receiving input on like, would they like to see walking tours? Would they like to develop some type of festival, things of that sort. So the boards were split up between just general content, and then we had a second set of boards where folks could interact with either like a map, or there was a space provided for them to provide comments to give us additional information on individuals, particular sites that might have been missed from the report. And then we created essentially like a passport for participants to use. So every time they completed a station, they got a sticker. And if they went through all the stations, they were entered into a raffle. And so that really kept folks engaged because that motivated them to get through the stations, but then they were also providing feedback to us in real time. And then we also provided at our just general outreach events at libraries, we created kind of like a matching game for participants to work on. And that was really popular with kids, and parents were helping their children fill out the form. So they were kind of learning in real time. So those were some of the materials that we created to help engage participants.
Great. We have a question from Holly who says, how long was your public outreach effort? And what attendance, was attendance more robust initially or later in the process?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, this project was 11 years in the making. I joined the team about a year ago. And when I was joining the team, that is when we were exploring, like, how do we shift our approach and make this more of an equitable and inclusive process? So I can speak more to that. And with that, it really took time. First, we had to identify who our community partners with. We had a series of kickoff meetings just to kind of introduce ourselves and understand what their priorities were before we could even plan an event. So I think it took time to build trust. But once everything was in place and we wanted to develop and organize the program, that kind of went through seamlessly, and everybody's really excited to do that. For the community forums, in terms of participation, I'd say we had about a little over 70 folks involved. And then outreach at the libraries, that ranged anywhere from like 40 to 70 folks. So I'd say that was a significant size group.
Yeah.
My understanding is that back in 2016, there were a series of outreach activities held, and that was more of like an open house, or like I guess you would just say like more of like a panel discussion where you present what the project is. But I would say in the last year, that's when we really decided to make the engagement more expansive and more inclusive and make it more of a back and forth dialogue.
Great. Let's see, this is John, from a practical standpoint, how do you maintain a citable living document? I don't quite understand what that means, but do you publish a new edition for each update? And I think you answered that you are sort of in the process of figuring out what that looks like, if it'll be volumes or if it's digital. He also asked, do you include explanatory notes when outdated information is corrected in the subsequent editions, or do you just make it updated?
So right now we do have the document available on our webpage, and it is in PDF form. My understanding is that when we make updates, we just replace the version that is on our webpage. I would have to speak with the preservation planner who is kind of managing the updates to the report, but I can get back to John. I can provide my email at the end of the program to get back to him on that.
Okay, great. Did you mention how it was funded? This was a city grant, right?
So with the initiation of the document, there was a grant to kind of support the development of the document. For the engagement, we are partnering with Erica Ribe from In Common, and she's kind of helping guide our engagement framework for the project. And it's through that city contract that we are able to compensate our community partners for their time and their effort to developing these engagement events.
Okay. Alicia, is there anything in the Q&A? No, there's just in the chat.
Yes, I am keeping an eye on the Q&A. So I guess we're speaking to related to sort of the length of outreach and things like that over the course of the project. One of the questions was, how did you first approach community partners to work on this report? And also, did you find that attendance at public outreach events changed over the course of the project? Was it more robust initially or more robust later in the process?
So in terms of partners, in terms of city partners, we try to identify organizations that were working on programs or projects that already aligned with the context statement. So, the Human Rights Commission was just a really great organization to partner with, as it aligned, I think, with trying to understand the history and experiences of the African American community in San Francisco. And then again, we were partnered with the San Francisco African American Arts and Cultural District. And so I think just with their background and relationship to the project, it just made sense to partner with them. And then in terms of attendance, I would say it's kind of hard to compare because I was not present at the original engagement activities back in 2016. But I would say attendance at these events were really robust. Just in my experience in terms of attending other engagement events for other projects, I would say it matched, if not exceeded that. And so it did seem like it was really well attended. Historically, these types of engagement activities tend to be contentious. And I think because we were really intentional with the programming for this and making sure that we had community buy-in and we were developing those partnerships, it made it more of just an open conversation, and folks were genuinely happy to see planning staff and community and to speak with them. And so I think we found it to be really successful.
Great. Mike is asking about the size of your budget needed to do the work. So I guess if you could share that. I don't know if that's something that you have to keep close to the vest in terms of, the grant and then having more funding and then, for it going for such a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a little bit above my job classification. However, yes, we do definitely need a dedicated budget to do engagement work. Um, a lot of the organizations that we partner with, they tend can be, may have they're short on staffing. Sometimes they need additional support in terms of developing content and materials. Um, and we're really leaning on them to support us with the outreach and connecting us with community and making sure that community members are participating. Um, and so, yeah, it's truly important to have funds set aside to compensate community partners. We don't want to just ask them to dedicate their time and take from them. We also need to be giving back to our community partners and community organizations for the time that they're spending to put on these types of events. And so, yeah, it's just
So that's
important.
built in, is that
Yes,
built into the,
it's
to the
built into the
framework?
project. Mhm.
Did we talk about the regulatory tools that were involved? What are some of the regulatory tools that were,
Yeah, that's a good question. So, our team at the planning department, we're working within various understandings and frameworks related to cultural heritage. So, from communities' holistic perspectives, we are also balancing that with the more rigid regulatory frameworks. And so, our role is to facilitate conversations and identify how existing tools serve communities and propose updates to those regulations. So we utilize a range of regulatory tools in our work, including our planning code and administrative code, their CEQA and environmental review, as well as the guidelines from the National and California Register. And then we have our local landmarking designation process. So we take all of that into account with recommendations from community and cultural organizations.
And in terms of some of the input that you received, how exhaustively did you document that input? Questions including like, did you keep everything? Did you track who provided it? And then sort of how you did that.
So in my PowerPoint slide, we did create a dashboard which summarizes the themes or areas of focus, but we do have appendices um, that cover like each individual response that we receive from community members. So it's essentially a spreadsheet and it lists out either the individual, the business, is it a residence, is it a church? So we have all of that itemized. And then we saved sign-up sheets from all of our events, but in terms of the input, that's not associated with any specific individual.
Sorry, I popped out for a minute there. There's one question in the Q&A. It says, what Allison wants to know, what kind of intangible cultural resources is the city proposing to interpret? And was there oral history included?
That's a really great question. And our team is, we're still trying to develop how we want to approach intangible cultural heritage. Right now, we have a tool that's under development. It's in beta form and it's called Community Stories. And it's essentially a survey, but it allows anyone from the public to share photographs, stories, audio files, text, and they can upload any of this to the Community Stories platform and just share any of their experiences or anything from the past that they would like to be documented. And so this is a way for the department to kind of hold that information, but make it still be publicly accessible. But again, in terms of intangible cultural heritage, we are looking to partner with different community organizations. We, right now, I want to say with the Urban Studies program at the University of San Francisco, they are conducting oral histories, and we are asking them to test out the tool to kind of supplement that project. But we're just hoping that's something that can be built out over time and that will have many users throughout the city.
Nice. Daniel talks about the concept of moving at the speed of trust. He wants to know, how do you know if you're moving too slow or too fast? Or how did you know?
Well, it's a good question. I think we are all aware that, working within a regulatory framework, we have very strict timelines and timeframes that we have to adhere to. But I think we had to kind of think outside of the box and be a little bit flexible. We do have projects that are moving a little bit more slower than we'd like, and that's okay because we need to make sure that our partners feel comfortable with the project that we're developing. And, a lot of individuals and communities, they have experienced a lot of harm from local government policy and practices that have been put in place. And so I think it's only fair that, we move at the speed of trust. And it takes time to develop that trust. And it's also one of those things where I think it's delayed gratification. You kind of have to put in the time. You're not going to have yeses across the board right away after the first kickoff meeting. It takes time to one. I think, you have to go in with sometimes without any expectations, and you have to be willing to be open to hearing other people's perspectives and remain curious and kind of meet a community where they're at. And then we, as planners, it's our role to figure out how do we utilize our regulatory tools to support community needs and help them develop the programming and policies that will support their priorities.
Good. There's one more question on the Q&A. In other community, this is Alexandria, in other community engagement talks, she's heard that it's best practice to meet people where they are, like you said. She says, can you talk about how your engagement events achieve that? Meeting people where they are.
Definitely. Some, typical outreach, sometimes we'll try to book a room like in one of our city offices and have folks come down to the city, or join a planning commission hearing or a preservation hearing. And those can usually be in the middle of the day. They're inconvenient, they're hard to access. And so when we're talking about meeting community where they're at, we have to understand where are the places that people frequent. We noticed that a lot of youth and community service centers seem to be a great location because they provide services directly to the community. People already gather there, and then making sure you're scheduling it so that it's accessible. So we would many times host the events like at 5 or between 5 to 7, knowing that folks would have to pick up their children after work, or they might just have a long commute to get to wherever the venue is. And so just being considerate of like where do people live, where do they work, and where do they hang out. And so that was crucial to like meeting folks with where they were at. Yeah, hope that answers that
Good.
question.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. There's a question from, sorry, Alicia. There's a question
I was just gonna go ahead, Rita.
Question from, I believe it's pronounced, it's Chris. Chris Winch. In reflecting on these community outreach efforts, I like this question. What's been the biggest hurdles and surprises that your department has learned through the process? Hurdles and surprises. I guess surprises could be good or not so good.
Biggest hurdles and surprises. I think going through this process, again, just moving at the speed of trust with community, moving with community readiness. In my my land use development projects, there's strict timelines and you have to move things forward accordingly. And you get it done by the time frame no matter what. And
Mm.
for me, it was such a transition of we didn't figure out what our goals were or what or who the community partners were going to be that were going to be involved. And so it was a shift of just learning how to be really flexible, but then also trying to find ways of how to support our partners. And then I think other challenges, contracting within the city, every agency, every department does it differently. And so there's not really a standard process. So trying to navigate that process was a major challenge. And just making sure that everybody is on the same page, has the same shared goals at the end of the day. It takes time to develop shared goals
Within the department as
within the
well as,
department and
yeah.
with our community partners and our sister agency. So again, it takes time. Some could take a month, it could take a few months to develop that. But once that's ironed out, I feel like everything else just kind of falls into place.
Great. I have a question. The potential landmarks that have been identified, what happens to them now? Do they get like sort of moved on? Do they get cached for moving on? What does it look like for the landmarks that the community identified through the process?
So right now, we're kind of, I think as planning, it's our role to kind of help hold the information, but ultimately we'll take our lead from community. So we plan to work with the community to advance the research on potential landmarks. And they can help us determine which property should be prioritized. But ultimately, through community, if they would like their elected officials or HPC to kind of push that forward, that's when our team would start to work on those landmark designations. So I think it just depends on community readiness.
Okay, so in that process, you let them know that you've identified these sites, and the next steps for you, if you choose to, are bringing it before the
Correct.
before the
Mhm.
Daniel has a question in the Q&A box. Do you have any advice for community activists and how they can be most effective in being heard by government when there's no true community engagement process?
That's a great question. I guess what comes to mind for me, if there is no true community engagement process, is allowing or utilizing like existing outreach pathways. So for example, if there are commission hearings and there's public comment opportunity, encouraging activists to speak in those forums, everything is on public record, and it's good for elected officials and our boards and our commissions to be aware of what their constituents are concerned with. So I would suggest using that as a platform. Or just even, taking the time to have a coffee meeting and meeting with different activists and organizations just to hear where they're at. Sometimes I think with our work, we're always looking to like get something out, like we should be expecting something, but I think it's good to also just be aware and be informed of what's going on in community as well.
Great. Catherine asks, how do you speak to the obvious benefits of this work to the quality of life in San Francisco in general? How would you speak to the obvious benefits? Oh, John. John has an answer or a response rather.
I think in terms of like the obvious, I think our community input dashboard, again, that's the living tool that we really want to highlight. And it's vital for gathering and analyzing feedback from the community. So I think by using that tool, community input remains at the forefront of our decision-making processes. And so that's really what is empowering residents to actively participate in shaping the future of their communities.
Okay. Great. And I think there's One more in the Q&A from Cindy. Hi, Cindy. Do you have places the community considers important but don't meet landmark criteria? Like those places that the folks brought to your attention but don't really meet landmark criteria? If so, how do you handle that with the community? How do you manage expectations?
Yeah, we've communicated that, we based on their input, we want to be able to document everything. And so, but of course, we need to conduct additional research to determine if, this information should live within the historic context statement, or if it even qualifies for landmarking. I think to date, we received, I want to say over 100 individual named leaders, events, businesses, and residents that were not identified in the context statement. And so I think we have to work with community to conduct additional research to see if it even meets the minimum eligibility for landmarking. But we have been very transparent in that, letting them know again that this is a document to kind of hold information, but it's not the end all be all.
Great. Jazzy has a question in the chat. As someone in a relatively new role of community outreach and engagement, I think Jazzy, we asked that question in the chat. What would you recommend to be a successful outreach and engagement specialist? But before you answer that, Ashley, you don't come from a background of community engagement. So what did that look like for you in transitioning to this job that had the importance of community engagement? And then maybe tacking on Jazzy's question about to be a successful outreach and engagement specialist.
Sure. I'll be honest, diving into community engagement was like jumping into the deep end of a pool without knowing how to swim. So my background again primarily revolved around regulatory compliance for land use development. And so that focuses on the objective aspects of the physical and built environment. But I've always been fascinated by people and how their lived experiences and environment shape their decisions. So I believe that a project or program can only succeed if it's resonating with its users. And I think that's what inspired me to explore community engagement work. And I think in order for community engagement to work, I think as a planner, it's our role to kind of be a connector. We are the conduit between community and then regulatory. We're conduit of information. And so I think by trying to bridge the gap between communities and the resources that we have access to can contribute to successful community engagement. And then I think even though it was not my area of expertise, I think just being willing to learn and adapt has made it just a rewarding journey so far.
Nice. If we don't have any more questions, I have one more. Actually, I have a few more. Can you describe your team's cultural mapping activities in the community? I know you touched on it a little bit, but what did those cultural mapping activities include? What did they look like?
So our team's cultural mapping activities in the community is an integral part of just the overall SF survey project. I mentioned we work on historic context statements and we've got field work going on. But we're evaluating properties that are at least 45 years old that have not been evaluated yet. And we're concentrating on neighborhood commercial districts first. And then through that field work, we'll conduct evaluations and develop draft findings. And once that phase is completed, we plan to expand our field work to include other areas such as residential areas, schools, libraries, churches. And then the selection of future phase locations is just determined by a variety of factors, including community readiness, the status of historic context statements, and our team's capacity. We are a small but mighty team. And then our staff regularly audits evaluations conducted across the city to ensure accuracy and compliance with current standards. So ultimately, our cultural mapping activities aim to create a comprehensive and accurate inventory of San Francisco's cultural heritage.
Nice. There is a question in the Q&A. Amy says, you mentioned compensating the community partner organizations. She's asking, did you also compensate community members that participated? And if so, how did you do that? Like what was the standard and how much?
So I didn't mention I was not involved with the focus groups, but for the focus groups, participants were compensated and they received gift cards, grocery gift cards. For the community forums, we did not compensate each participant, but we did have raffles going on. So a lot of folks did, they were able to win gift cards that way. So yeah, it is definitely important to compensate participants depending on the level of engagement that you're asking from them.
And compensation can look different for different groups or different activities, but it is a sort of a catch-all for compensation. I like that gift card idea. I have a question, and I know we have like only a few more minutes left, so hopefully it's not too extensive a question. Armed with the knowledge and better understanding of African American communities and their heritage in the city of San Francisco, what practical ways do you and your team hope that the city staff, property owners, and even developers will use the information in the document?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's essentially why we're even doing this work in the first place. But we hope that, city staff, property owners, and developers approach this knowledge with a sense of responsibility and commitment to positive change. Again, we can't ignore the fact that past government policies have inflicted harm on people of color, including the African American community. So moving forward, it's crucial that we acknowledge this history, learn from it, and then actively work towards developing new policies and programs that address these past harms. I think this involves fostering community-led cultural advocacy and research and implementing policies that prioritize equity and inclusivity. And then again, our goal is to create a more expansive sense of belonging and understanding within our diverse and complex city.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know that I've gotten a lot out of this, and I will be emailing you as the city and Getty do the African American Historic Places LA project. A lot of things in common. You guys have done a lot of things well. And again, it's about, community engagement and not just community outreach, but also you as, part of government and part of, planning processes and tools. Yeah, I'm just super excited for more of the work that will come out of the core work that you guys have done. Well, I want to thank Ashley, Alicia, and I, thank you for your time and for your expertise and for just allowing us to bombard you with all sorts of questions. And Ashley has also said that she'll be available via email if there are any follow-up questions that you have, or as all of you out there dive into your projects, your preservation projects that want to engage and not just outreach to the community. She'll make her email available. I think. Are you going to put it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll drop that in the chat right now.
Okay.
Little typo. But no, thank you so much, Rita and Alicia, for having me. It was a pleasure to be a part of this webinar. And I just look forward to ongoing conversations and learning from what others are doing as well. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, CPF.
Thank you so much.
John, there you go.
Here I am. I just wanted to thank the three of you, especially coming. I went to grad school for public history, but most of what I learned about community engagement was from books. And this is a whole different way of looking at it. I feel a much more rewarding way. So I thank you for that, Ashley. Such wonderful work you're doing at San Francisco Planning. So with that, I wanted to remind everybody, we hope you enjoyed the program. If you'd like to leave feedback when you close this window or when we close this window, you'll receive a link to a survey. Please let us know how we did, and I'll share that with our speakers and moderators. We hope you'll join us again for some future CPF programs, including our new Emerging Professionals series, which we're really excited about. Our next Emerging Professional program will feature, highlight the work of Laura Dominguez, who's also on our board of trustees. And we also have a three-part local government training boot camp that's available on our website now. Information on all of these programs is available on our website at californiapreservation.org. And while you're there, we hope you'll also consider joining the CPF as a member. Memberships start at the very, very low rate of $50 a year, which includes benefits to a number of things. And as always, students are completely free to join CPF, and they get free access to our paid programs as well. So we hope you'll consider doing that. And we wanted to thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you at the next program. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.